Hello folks, so for today's video I've asked some members of the DBD community for their hot takes and we will be discussing some of what you had to say. If this video does well, please feel free to leave some of your DBD hot takes in this comment section as I'd love to do another one and see what you guys have to say. Alright, so our first take is from Sir Easy B, who says toxic survivor mains are way more common and annoying than toxic killer mains. They're also super cringe. Now if we really look at it, it's kind of a cold take, to be honest. I think by proxy you're going to see a lot more toxic survivor players just because there are more of them in the first place, and also it depends what role you play. If you lean towards the killer role, you're outnumbered 4 to 1, so you're more likely to see toxicity from your opponent simply because, well, you're going to be encountering more of them per match. I myself play more survivor than killer, so by proxy I see more toxicity from killers, so you must keep that kind of bias in mind. I think no matter which role you play, being toxic is kind of cringe anyway, and that's something most rational people can agree with. But it also depends on your definition of toxicity. Like, for example, slugging and tunneling I don't consider toxic, but hitting on hook, humping the survivor while slugged and endgame chat slurs, I would. The same way a couple of teabags, gesturing taunt, or a flashlight click to invite the killer to chase you is not toxic, but constant teabagging after a pallet stun or at the exit gate I would consider being toxic or rude. It's all about perspective. Again though, this is kind of a cold take. I think as survivors become the de facto role of toxic behaviour with there being more of them, and we all know how these survivor mains can get. Now these two comments are the polar opposite of each other, so I decided to put them together. So Jug of the Thief says, great name by the way, the community should be more open to less requested or horror adjacent licenses. Say I bring up something less requested, I get people immediately saying it doesn't fit. I ask if they've seen it, I get nothing back, which I assume means no. People will shut an idea down with no knowledge of the series, just look how they treated Karnaki. And another great name, Gordon the Big Engine says, people asking for shit like Omni-Man and Darth Vader are tourists who probably haven't even watched any of the all-star slasher movies their asymmetrical horror game was inspired by. Behaviour shouldn't consider non-horror characters who are vaguely imposing / kill people until they've exhausted every single possible horror license, like Predator or The Thing. So let's look at this from both angles. I think the idea of new additions to DBD for the most part is a good thing, as it keeps people coming back for new content and invites people that like their chosen and favoured IP to try the game themselves because of a series that interests them. I know for a lot of people Tokyo Ghoul was a controversial chapter as it was anime, and the devs themselves said that there would be a lot of complaints about it. I'm sorry to disappoint some of you, but I don't really like anime, and as much as I dislike playing against the Ghoul and its ridiculous unskippable cutscene of a power, the concept for him is really cool, and Tokyo Ghoul's source material is brutal and thematic for Dead by Daylight. With ties to torture and cannibalism, you can't tell me that these themes aren't at least horror adjacent, and I think for an animated series, the art team at Behaviour did a pretty good job at implementing him into the 3D space. However, I can also see where we start to question where do we draw the line. We don't particularly want DBD to become horror Fortnite, as a lot of people draw comparisons to in that regard. We have people like Lara Croft and skin collabs with Rainbow Six Siege, and perhaps allowing certain IPs to come into the game might water down or oversaturate the game's identity as a whole. But you can be thankful that this game does seem to prioritise horror IPs first and foremost. I mean, we've just got the one and only Jason Voorhees as our latest killer, and Art the Clown is on his way soon, which I think are both iconic horror slasher licenses. Ultimately, it's up to Behaviour to make the judgment call on what turns up in this game. It's just a question of whether they pick the right IPs and if they do them right. And I know a lot of people would want the Predator or the Thing in DBD, myself included, but there are also two killers that would be difficult tasks to implement into this game and make them work. You must remember that Behaviour are limited by license issues and the process it takes to acquire them, and constantly shouting and spamming I want X from Y isn't going to get them in the game any faster. Stuffy Edits and More says, Jason is an okay killer. I think they should make the fog limit shorter. So yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you there, but I'm not going to go into too much detail about this one, but I'd say yeah, Jason is a fairly decent killer that sits at a high B to low A tier for me. He's not too overwhelming once you learn his counterplay, although crouch walking can really drag out games sometimes, and I really enjoy going against projectile killers apart from this guy. I would slightly agree, and I think a lot of other people would like to see a cooldown to his omnipresent evil power, as paired with certain builds and add-ons, it can become quite unfair or unfun to play against. If you want the full coverage of what I think of Jason and how to improve him, I have a video here you could watch after this one. Now Dr. Dropper Oreo says 2v8 should be a permanent mode. Now, to be honest, I consider this a lukewarm take. There's a lot of people that have asked for this mod to be permanent, as it's way more casual. It takes a lot of the stress of the base game away, with also being incredibly hectic and more fun at the same time. But there's also people that feel fatigued with the constant implementation of this game mode every other month, and they'd rather it not be so frequent. Saying that though, it's DBD's most popular game mode to date. Some players will only play the 2v8 game mode as they can't stand the stress of the regular 1v4. The question is, would having 2v8 permanently be good for DBD? You have to remember that when 2v8 does come back around, it completely obliterates killer queue times for both game modes, with many people wanting to play killer with their friends, and the split queues from 2 competing game modes making the wait times longer as a direct result. Thankfully we do have the play while you wait feature to help ease that burden, which I think a lot of players take for granted. I've heard many people say they are desperate for a casual and a ranked version of this game, and 2v8 kind of holds the answer to this in some respects, but I think for the overall health of the game and to stop this game from stagnating, 2v8 should only be a limited mode that should have consistent and meaningful updates every time it rolls around to keep it feeling fresh. And if I'm to expand on this point, the last thing that was added to 2v8 that was anything impactful was the Torchbearer class, which to be honest is fun as a survivor, but I can feel it being absolutely miserable as killer, and you have to remain so vigilant. 2v8 is supposed to be casual, and it's difficult to do that when you have to always be on guard for flashlight and flashbang saves. Great take though, it leaves a lot up to discussion. Let me know what you guys think. Now my good friend That's Dreamy, who I recommend checking out for short form content, he has a spicy take which says the community is to blame for the downfall and content creators. This is interesting because it kind of depends on what you mean by downfall, as this game is currently more popular than ever, but the game still has issues that ruin the overall experience such as cheaters and high ping, which my friend goes on to explain in a further comment. Now we as a community can be quite indecisive in what we want from this game. When there's no content we complain that the game becomes stale, but behaviour can't provide the means to keep the cash flow of oncoming licenses and fix the game's problems at the same time, as is evident with their failed quality of life update. What I think Dreamy here is trying to say is that we've all become complacent in allowing the shiny new thing that comes our way to help distract us from the game's overarching problems, like the fact that behaviour only have the free version of easy anti-cheat installed, which is something they could easily pay for, and help reduce the amount of cheaters that run rampant in the game, as of at the moment, the beta files are still in the game and can be easily bypassed in order to access their cheating software. What's more is that a lot of content creators fail to address these issues and use their positions of influence to help spread this message, which if enough noise is made about it, behaviour simply can't just ignore it like they have been doing. Last person with a huge following that actually gave some attention to these kinds of issues was Hens, who actually interviewed some cheaters to find out their motives, and the conclusion was, well, because it's easy to do. In their eyes, DBD belongs to the cheating community. I also want to give a big shout out to Epidemic, who shits on cheaters with Bubba on a regular basis. Now the regular community cannot have it both ways. You need to boycott this game with your wallet, as I have done. If you continue to buy skins and licensed characters, and behaviour will still have that money coming in, they'll see no reason to improve these systems. That's the cold hard truth a lot of people can't seem to accept. This game lives in a state of key jingling supremacy. Totally Kishin says, give everyone a first person view. Now this is definitely a hot take, as I see a lot of problems with this one, but the most obvious one of survivors needing the advantage of the third person perspective in order to hold check spots and see which direction the killer is coming from in order to plan ahead. However, I'm not opposed to having the idea of having this become a limited time game mode where killers and survivors swap their perspectives around. Or maybe like an April Fool's kind of thing like they did with My Little Oni. Also, I still don't understand why they called him that, as that dude was big as shit. Anyway, this definitely would be a controversial change if it happened, but I can guarantee that playing Survivor would be a hell of a lot more frightening in first person mode. And maybe in the future when we get access to mod tools next year, we could potentially make this a reality. CRB DBD says there should be emotes for survivors, like actual emotes like the ones with mods. I'm not opposed to the idea of extra emotes for survivors, but you have to wonder what more could they really add emote-wise, because with the two that we have, I think it covers a lot of bases of non-verbal communication without becoming too ridiculous. I mean, it would be hilarious to have dancing emotes, but also might take away a level of immersion for some people, if you're into that kind of thing. I just don't want another situation like the old Friday the 13th game with bully squads dancing after you head on the killer, which I'm sure to a lot of people sounds like a great idea, but to others, not so much. I think the ones we have in the game already are fine as they are and get all the information we need to get across without being too silly, but if you have any ideas for practical emotes, not just backflips and dancing, let me know. Now, Mateus' last name says there should be a separate queue for high ping players. I'm sorry bro, this is a take that's about as warm as a polar bear's nutsack, because my god, please, for the love of God, I just want this to be implemented in some way. I am the #1 hater of bad ping in DBD, and way more often than not I am paired with people who don't have a server in their country, and the games are miserable as a result. Sure, I don't really need to tell you, but I cannot begin to say the amount of times I've been hit when I'm way clear of a window, and I'm sure many of you have experienced the same thing. I don't really know how this is such a crazy issue in this game, as I think I've played with people from every country at this point somehow. There are servers in other countries, I know for definite, but somehow I'm being paired with people from America, Japan, Russia, and South Africa. And unless these people are all using VPNs, behaviour needs to find a way to disperse people into lobbies of other people with high ping, or places where there are no servers in their country, or you know, just find the means to make servers for people around the world. We're not a small indie dev studio anymore, and I'm no expert, but I think it's entirely possible to make servers for people worldwide so we can all have a stable connection and be paired with people in the same continent as us. Now Pal from my Discord says Bamboozle should only activate when basic vaulting. Ooh, Wesker and Legion mains are going to be mad about this one. Now I would actually disagree with this take, but I'd also say it's a hot one. So recently behaviour changed from perk descriptions to involve special break and basic break actions for pallets, which I think removes a lot of synergy with certain killer powers, and this falls into the same kind of category. I like DBD for the fact you can experiment and play around with certain variables to find effective builds certain killers and survivor perks could use, and if we keep taking away the ability to synergize abilities and perks, it can remove a lot of the fun of doing so. So even if it can feel a little cheesy sometimes with certain combinations, I would rather perks flow well together with certain killers to find out what works best for them. On the other hand, what becomes meta is what you are more likely to see when facing a certain killer, but can also become repetitive and boring at the same time. For example, Legion with Thanatophobia or Ghoul with Friends to the End. It's kind of a difficult one to balance, as having more synergy can provide both customization options as well as letting the most effective be the option everyone picks. And finally we have Captain Crispy, who says the game is not unbalanced. There is enough nuance to the mechanics to make it very much playable and winnable on both sides, and players claiming that the devs abandoned the balancing of the game are bitter and hard stuck. Now, no discredit to the other comments, but this is the kind of take I was looking for. People have argued which side this game has swung towards for the longest time, and I totally agree with this take. I think it can become survivor-sided when survivors are all competent and have direct communication with each other like through Discord. However, I also think that killer mechanics and the flaws of the game can easily be exploited even when you aren't very good at killer, and some killer builds are so nasty that countering them can become next to impossible. But at high MMR, the survivors know how to utilise all the really strong perks they have and also maximise wasting the killer's time and progress throughout the match. So to reiterate what this comment said, there is so much nuance to this game that can be favourable for either side if played correctly, as well as some maps leaning towards it being better for killer or survivor. There are so many variables which has helped this game to stay alive as long as it has, and it's outlasted all of its competitors. It is just unfortunate that this take has come along when it did, as our current in-game event, the Black Banquet, is undoubtedly the most survivor-sided event we've ever had. But I think a lot of killer wins are forgetting that the Masquerade event was quite killer-sided with remote hooking. The difference is with this event is that Survivor definitely feels more stacked in terms of in-game powers, whereas killer feels more like an afterthought. I just went to go check the comments of my post, and yours happened to be there just as I was recording the video, so I'm grateful for you for ending it on a good one. So that's all the time I have for today, folks. Please consider giving me a sub and a comment of your hot take, and maybe you'll see it in a future video. Alright, take care and have a lovely day.